Professor Klex adjusted his 4 pairs of safety goggles and double-checked the containment field around his lecture podium. Teaching advanced xenobiology at Galactic University was dangerous enough without students accidentally vaporizing themselves during finals week. Today, class, we're covering the most lethal compounds known to science, he announced, his tentacles trembling slightly. I cannot stress this enough, these substances are so deadly that merely mispronouncing their names has been known to cause spontaneous cellular collapse. 3 students sat in the reinforced lecture hall, each behind their own emergency containment barrier. Zara, a crystalline being from Cautious Prime, had already activated 17 different safety protocols and was wearing what appeared to be a hazmat suit made of pure energy. Blix, an insufferably pompous blob from the academic sector, had his datapad ready and was visibly smug about knowing at least half the material already. Gomp, a furry creature whose species had evolved from professional warriors, looked like he was about to have a panic attack just from being in the same star system as dangerous chemicals. First up, Klex continued, pulling up a holographic display. We have capsaicin, chemical formula C18H27O3. This compound triggers pain receptors so aggressively that it's classified as a weapon of mass destruction in 47 different galactic codes. Even a single molecule can cause complete nervous system shutdown in most species. Zara immediately raised her crystalline appendage. Professor, shouldn't we evacuate the planet before discussing this? Excellent question. That's why we're using the university's most advanced containment system. Klex gestured to the impressive array of force fields, backup generators, and emergency teleportation devices surrounding them. Next, we have theobromine. This one's particularly insidious because it masquerades as something pleasant. It's a cardiac stimulant that causes immediate heart failure in 93% of known species. Blix inflated himself importantly. Obviously, I've already memorized the molecular structure and its 17 known antidotes. There are no known antidotes, Blix. Oh, Blix deflated slightly. Gomp raised a shaky paw. Professor? Are we going to die just from learning about these? Not if you follow proper safety protocols and never, under any circumstances, come into contact with these substances. Klex pulled up another display. Our final compound for today is ethanol. This cellular destroyer literally dissolves organic matter from the inside out. It's so potent that it's used in industrial applications to sterilize equipment. The professor paused dramatically, adjusting his safety equipment again. I'm showing you these compounds because knowledge is your best defense. The galaxy is full of dangerous worlds where these toxins might exist naturally. Being prepared could save your life and the lives of everyone on your ship. Just then, the classroom's communication system chimed with an urgent message from the dean's office. Attention, Professor Klex, came the tinny voice. The cultural exchange program begins today. The human delegation has arrived and will be joining your class for observational purposes. Please prepare appropriate safety briefings. Klex blinked all 4 of his primary eyes. Humans? I wasn't informed we were hosting Death Worlders today. They specifically requested to observe your toxicology class. Something about learning what the rest of the galaxy considers dangerous for their diplomatic protocols. Zara's energy hazmat suit flickered with anxiety. Death Worlders in our toxicology class? Shouldn't we evacuate the system? Now, Klex said, though his tentacles were definitely trembling more vigorously. Humans may come from a high-gravity world with dangerous weather, but they're still sapient beings. I'm sure they understand basic safety protocols. Blix had pulled up his datapad and was scrolling frantically. According to my research, humans survive their planetary conditions through advanced technology and careful environmental management. Gomp was now visibly hyperventilating. Death Worlders coming to learn about deadly toxins. This is how horror movies start. Everyone remain calm, Klex announced, though he was now activating additional safety measures around the classroom. We'll simply give them a standard safety briefing and proceed with extreme caution. After all, what's the worst that could happen? The 3 students exchanged looks that clearly said they could think of several thousand ways this could go wrong. The airlock hissed open, And Ambassador Jake Martinez strolled into the classroom like he was walking into a coffee shop instead of a maximum security xenobiology laboratory. Behind him came Dr. Lisa Park, a xenocultural specialist who was already taking notes, and Commander Tom Rodriguez, whose job was presumably to keep the other two humans from accidentally starting an interstellar incident. "Hey there," Jake called out cheerfully, completely ignoring the 17 different warning signs posted around the entrance. "Hope we're not interrupting anything important. I brought snacks." Professor Klex's tentacles went rigid. In his 300 years of teaching, no one had ever brought food into a toxicology lab. "Ambassador Martinez, I must insist that you dispose of any organic matter immediately. We're dealing with substances that could contaminate." "Oh, these?" Jake pulled out a bag of something that crinkled ominously. "Just some chips. Want one? They're ghost pepper flavor, really spicy stuff." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. Zara's energy suit flickered frantically. Did he just say ghost pepper? As in phantasmic capsaicin derivatives? No, Jake laughed, completely missing the growing horror on everyone's faces. Just regular ghost peppers. Though I guess they are pretty hot. Lisa here can barely handle the mild salsa I brought. Dr. Park rolled her eyes. Jake thinks anything under 50,000 Scoville units is mild seasoning. Blix was frantically consulting his datapad. 50,000 Scovilles? That's enough concentrated capsaicin to weaponize an entire battle cruiser. Commander Rodriguez, apparently the sensible one, noticed the growing panic. "Is there a problem? We went through standard diplomatic health screening." "The screening?" Klex gasped. "Did they test for poison resistance?" "Poison resistance?" Jake looked confused. "Why would they test for that? I mean, sure, I can handle my liquor, but that's just practice." At the word liquor, Gomp fainted. His species had evolved specifically to detect deadly toxins, and the casual mention of ethanol consumption had overwhelmed his nervous system. "You consume ethanol voluntarily?" Zara's voice reached frequencies that technically qualified as a weapon in some star systems. "Well, yeah," Jake said, still completely oblivious to the crisis he was causing. "Friday night margaritas are a tradition. Though I have to cut back. Lisa says more than 6 beers gives me a hangover." 6 beers, Blix whispered, his blob-like form quivering. 6 servings of industrial solvent. Dr. Park decided to help. "Maybe we should explain human dietary habits? For cultural context?" This was possibly the worst thing she could have said. "Oh, great idea." Jake perked up. "So we humans are pretty adaptable eaters. We've got this great stuff called coffee. It's a caffeine solution that really gets you going in the morning. I usually have about 4 cups before noon." Professor Klex was now gripping the edge of his podium with all available appendages. 4 servings of cardiac stimulant before midday? Sometimes 5 if it's Monday, Jake continued helpfully. And then there's chocolate. Man, I could eat chocolate all day. Dark chocolate especially. The bitter stuff with like 80% cocoa content. The remaining conscious students were staring at Jake like he was a walking natural disaster, which from their perspective he essentially was. "Let me get this straight," Klex said slowly. "You regularly consume capsaicin for pleasure, ethanol for recreation, caffeine for energy, and theobromine for enjoyment?" "Don't forget the hot sauce," Commander Rodriguez added unhelpfully. "Jake puts that stuff on everything." "I've got some in my bag if anyone wants to try it," Jake offered, reaching for his supplies again. "No," came the collective shriek from every alien in the room, including the ones who were supposedly unconscious. Jake paused, finally sensing that something might be wrong. "Are you guys okay? You look a little stressed." Blix had pulled up his toxicological database and was cross-referencing human dietary habits with known lethal compounds. The results were making his usually smug demeanor crack around the edges. "Professor," Blix said weakly, "according to my calculations, A standard human breakfast contains enough toxic compounds to qualify as a chemical weapons facility. That's ridiculous, Dr. Park laughed. Jake's breakfast is just coffee, toast with hot sauce, and maybe some chocolate cereal if he's feeling fancy. The aliens exchanged looks of pure horror. We need an emergency faculty meeting, Klex whispered. Immediately. While the humans were being given a cultural orientation tour of the campus, which was really just an excuse to get them away from the laboratory, Zara, Blix, and a recently revived Gomp huddled around Blix's advanced research terminal in what they were calling Operation. How are they still alive? Okay, Blix said, his usual pompous demeanor replaced by scientific fascination and existential dread. I've accessed the Galactic Toxicology database, cross-referenced it with the Human Cultural Archive, and the results are absolutely terrifying. Zara leaned in, her crystalline form refracting light nervously. Define terrifying. Are we talking accidentally dangerous or weaponized biology? Judge for yourself. Blix pulled up a holographic display. Capsaicin, the compound in what humans call peppers. They rate it on something called the Scoville scale. A standard jalapeno pepper rates at 8,000 units. The ghost pepper ambassador Martinez mentioned over 1 million units. But Gomp's fur stood on end. That's enough to kill everyone on this station. It gets worse, Blix continued. They have competitive eating contests. Humans voluntarily consume increasingly potent capsaicin concentrations for entertainment. There's something called the Carolina Reaper that rates at over 2 million Scoville units. 2 million? Zara's form flickered. That's military-grade chemical warfare. And they put it on pizza, Blix added helpfully. The three students sat in horrified silence for a moment. What about the caffeine? Gomp asked weakly. Blix scrolled to another section. Standard human coffee contains between 95 and 200 milligrams of caffeine per serving. The human ambassador mentioned consuming 4 to 5 servings per morning. That's a gram of pure cardiac stimulant before lunch, Zara calculated. My species uses caffeine as a last resort medical treatment for heart failure. A single dose. But wait, Blix said with the enthusiasm of someone who'd completely lost perspective on good news versus bad news. I found something even more interesting. Humans have something called energy drinks. Some contain over 300 milligrams of caffeine per serving, plus additional stimulants. Gomp was frantically taking notes. Please tell me they use these energy drinks as emergency medical supplies. No, they drink them while playing video games. The silence stretched until Zara finally spoke. What about the ethanol? Blix's display showed a chart that made everyone's various organs clench in sympathy. Human ethanol consumption varies, but social drinking typically involves consuming enough alcohol to achieve what they call tipsy or buzzed. The blood alcohol content they consider fun would put most species into immediate organ failure. And they do this for entertainment, Gomp said flatly. Multiple times per week for some individuals. They have entire establishments dedicated to ethanol consumption called bars and social rituals around it. Social rituals around poison consumption, Zara repeated. Of course they do. Now the chocolate, Blix continued, really hitting his stride now. Theobromine content varies, but dark chocolate, which the humans specifically seek out for its intense flavor, contains anywhere from 5 to 10 milligrams per gram of chocolate. How much do they typically consume? Gomp asked, though he looked like he didn't want to know. Anywhere from 20 grams to several hundred grams per sitting. There are reports of humans consuming entire chocolate cakes which can weigh over a kilogram. The three students stared at the data in stunned silence. So let me summarize, Zara said slowly. Humans regularly consume industrial solvents, chemical weapons, cardiac stimulants, and cellular toxins. For fun. Don't forget, Blix added, they often combine these substances. Coffee with chocolate. Alcohol with spicy food. There's something called Mexican hot chocolate that combines 3 separate deadly compounds in a single beverage. How? Gomp's voice cracked. How are they still alive? How did they survive long enough to develop space travel? Blix pulled up one final display. That's the truly terrifying part. According to their evolutionary history, they didn't just survive exposure to these compounds. They specifically evolved to seek them out. Humans developed taste preferences for substances that would kill other species. They weaponized their own digestive system, Zara whispered. And then they got bored and started making it spicier, Blix concluded. The three students sat in the kind of silence usually reserved for contemplating the heat death of the universe. Finally, Gomp spoke up. Should we warn the galaxy? Warn them about what? Zara asked. That humans exist? That they eat poison for breakfast? That they've probably been accidentally terrifying every species they've met with casual mentions of their snack preferences? All of the above? Professor Klex chose that moment to rush back into the lab, his tentacles in full panic mode. Students. Emergency meeting. The humans have offered to demonstrate their food preparation techniques for the cultural exchange program. The three students looked at each other with the shared expression of beings who had just realized they were living in a cosmic horror story. Professor, Blix said carefully, exactly how much do you know about human dietary habits? They eat food, presumably, Klex replied. Why? Should I be concerned? The students' collective silence was answer enough. The university's cultural exchange kitchen had been designed to accommodate the dietary requirements of 47 different species. It had never been tested against humans who considered industrial toxins to be flavor enhancers. Ambassador Jake Martinez stood at the central cooking station with the confidence of someone who had no idea he was about to demonstrate advanced chemical warfare to a room full of terrified academics. All right, everyone, Jake announced cheerfully. Today I'm going to show you how to make authentic street tacos with all the fixings. It's comfort food where I come from. Professor Klex, Zara, Blix, and Gomp watched from behind reinforced safety barriers that had been hastily installed around the kitchen's perimeter. The university's entire emergency response team was on standby, though none of them were quite sure what they were supposed to be responding to. First up, we're going to make the salsa, Jake continued, pulling out what looked like an innocent collection of vegetables. We've got tomatoes, onions, cilantro, lime juice, and of course peppers. I brought some habaneros and ghost peppers to give it a nice kick. He's weaponizing produce, Zara whispered. Jake began chopping the peppers with casual disregard for basic safety protocols. No gloves, no eye protection, no containment field. Just a human and a knife, preparing chemical weapons like he was making a sandwich. Now the key to good salsa is balance, Jake explained, tossing chopped ghost peppers into a bowl like they were regular vegetables instead of concentrated capsaicin delivery systems. You want enough heat to clear your sinuses, but not so much that you can't taste the other flavors. Clear your sinuses? Gomp's voice reached new octaves of panic. He's talking about deliberate respiratory system irritation. The really good stuff should make you sweat a little, Jake added helpfully, mixing the ingredients together. Gets your endorphins going. Blix was frantically taking notes. Endorphin production through chemical irritation. They've turned poisoning into a recreational drug experience. Jake moved on to the next component. Now for the protein. I'm using carnitas, that's slow-cooked pork. But the real magic happens with the seasoning. He pulled out an array of bottles and containers that looked like they belonged in a chemistry lab rather than a kitchen. Cumin, paprika, chipotle powder, cayenne pepper, and my secret ingredient. Jake held up a small bottle with a skull and crossbones on the label. Carolina Reaper hot sauce. Just a few drops will do it. Skull and crossbones, Gomp shrieked. He's got actual poison with a skull and crossbones label. It's just a warning label. Dr. Park called out from the observation area. Standard practice for anything above 500,000 Scoville units. 500,000, Professor Klex repeated faintly. Jake began seasoning the meat with the casual precision of someone who had clearly done this many times before. The smell alone was making the emergency response team's equipment malfunction. The aroma should be complex, Jake explained, apparently immune to the chemical warfare he was conducting. You want to smell the char? the spices, and just a hint of that pepper heat that lets you know it's going to be good. The aliens were now wearing full environmental suits and breathing recycled air. Now for the coffee, Jake announced, moving to what appeared to be a standard beverage preparation station. Oh no, Blix whimpered. He's moving on to the cardiac stimulants. Jake began preparing what he called Cuban coffee, which involved concentrating caffeine to levels that would probably power small spacecraft. The trick is to get it strong enough that you can feel your heartbeat change after the first sip, he explained. Really wakes you up. Induced cardiac arrhythmia for consciousness enhancement, Zara translated. He's describing medical torture as morning routine. But Jake wasn't finished. And for dessert, I thought I'd whip up some chocolate lava cake. Dark chocolate, of course. The really bitter stuff with high cocoa content. The kind that makes your mouth tingle. Oral tissue irritation from theobromine exposure, Gomp said weakly. He thinks cellular damage tastes good. The preparation continued with Jake casually handling enough toxic compounds to declare the kitchen a hazardous waste site. He assembled tacos loaded with chemical weapons, served coffee that registered as an industrial solvent, and presented chocolate cake that should have required a hazmat disposal team. And then, while the entire room watched in horrified fascination, Ambassador Jake Martinez sat down and began eating everything he had just prepared. The silence was deafening. Jake took a bite of taco loaded with ghost pepper salsa, smiled with satisfaction, and said, "Perfect. Just the right amount of heat. Anyone else want to try?" The collective no. From the observation area was loud enough to register on seismic equipment. Jake washed down the taco with a gulp of coffee that should have stopped his heart, followed it with a forkful of chocolate cake, and then looked around with confusion at the assembled aliens who were staring at him like he had just performed an impossible magic trick. "Is everything okay?" Jake asked. "You all look like you've seen a ghost." "We've seen something far more terrifying," Professor Klex whispered. "We've seen a human eat lunch." Emergency faculty meeting, Galactic University security level, maximum attendees, everyone who could handle the truth. Professor Klex stood before the assembled faculty with the haunted expression of someone who had just discovered that everything he thought he knew about biology was wrong. "Colleagues," he began, his tentacles trembling with a mixture of scientific excitement and existential terror, "that what we witnessed today has fundamentally changed our understanding of evolutionary biology, toxicology, and the very nature of survival itself." Dean Vortak, a distinguished academic whose species had evolved from cautious herbivores, leaned forward in concern. "Professor, surely you're being dramatic. The humans ate some food. Unusual food, perhaps, but they turned poison into seasoning," Klex interrupted. "They didn't just survive exposure to deadly toxins. They actively seek them out for pleasure." Dr. Kixit from the Evolutionary Biology Department raised a claw. "Explain." Klex activated the holographic display, showing the chemical compositions Jake had casually consumed. Capsaicin, a compound evolved by plants specifically to prevent consumption. Humans bypassed this evolutionary defense mechanism and decided it improved flavor. "That's impossible," Dr. Kixit protested. "No species evolves to enjoy pain." "That's what I thought too. But then I accessed the Human Cultural Database." Klex pulled up a new display. "They have competitive eating contests. Humans gather in groups to see who can consume the most toxic compounds. There's something called the Hot Wing Challenge, where participants deliberately consume increasingly concentrated capsaicin until their bodies physically reject it." The faculty sat in stunned silence. "It gets worse," Blix called out from the student section. "They have restaurants dedicated to serving food so toxic it requires legal waivers." "Legal waivers?" Dean Vortak's voice cracked. "Establishments where humans pay money to consume compounds so dangerous that the restaurant requires signed documents absolving them of responsibility for medical emergencies," Zara explained helpfully. Professor Klex nodded grimly. "And then there's their relationship with ethanol. Most species that accidentally consume ethanol die within hours. Humans developed an entire social structure around voluntary ethanol consumption." Dr. Myrinks from Social Sciences raised a fin. Surely that's medicinal? Religious ritual? Recreation, Klex said flatly. They have buildings called bars where the primary purpose is consuming ethanol in social groups. They have competitions to see who can consume the most ethanol without losing consciousness. They celebrate major life events by consuming ethanol. They weaponized intoxication, Dean Vortak whispered. And caffeine, Klex continued relentlessly. A cardiac stimulant that most species use as emergency medical treatment. Humans consume it daily, often multiple times per day, to achieve what they call alertness. Daily cardiac stimulation for cognitive enhancement, Dr. Kixit muttered, frantically taking notes. The physiological stress alone should kill them. But here's the truly terrifying part, Klex said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I accessed their planetary survey data. Earth isn't just a world where these compounds exist naturally. It's a world where these compounds evolved specifically because the planet was trying to kill everything on it. The holographic display shifted to show Earth's geological history. The volcanic activity that would sterilize most worlds, weather patterns that shift from deadly heat to killing cold, atmospheric composition that's essentially a controlled explosion waiting to happen, radiation levels that should prevent complex life. And yet they thrived, Dr. Kixit finished. They didn't just survive. They turned survival into entertainment. Exactly. They developed agriculture specifically to cultivate plants that evolved to be toxic. They domesticated animals that could kill them. They built civilizations in areas prone to natural disasters because they found it exciting. Gomp raised a shaky paw. What does this mean for galactic diplomacy? Professor Klex looked around the room at his colleagues, beings who had spent their entire careers studying the most dangerous aspects of the universe, only to discover that humans treated those dangers as snack food. It means, Klex said slowly, that every time humans have offered to share their culture with other species, they've essentially been offering to poison everyone in the room. And they don't even realize it, Dean Vortak added. Ambassador Martinez genuinely thought he was being friendly. Which brings us to the real question, Dr. Kixit said. What else don't we know about human normal behavior? Blix's datapad chimed with an incoming message. Professor, I'm getting reports from the Cultural Exchange Program. The humans have offered to host something called a barbecue for the entire diplomatic corps. The faculty exchanged looks of pure terror. What's a barbecue? Dean Vortak asked weakly. Blix consulted his database. Apparently it involves cooking meat over open flame while consuming ethanol and applying various capsaicin-based compounds for flavor enhancement. They're going to poison the entire diplomatic corps, Dr. Kixit realized. And they think they're being hospitable. Professor Klex stood up slowly. I think we need to update our first contact protocols. To include what? Dean Vortak asked. A new classification system. We've been operating under the assumption that sapient species fall into categories like herbivore, carnivore, or omnivore. But humans have revealed the existence of an entirely new category. Which is? Klex looked around the room with the expression of someone who had just discovered that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than anyone had previously imagined. Apex predators who learned to cook. 3 weeks after what would become known in academic circles as the taco incident, Professor Klex found himself standing before the Galactic Council's emergency session on human integration protocols. The assembled representatives looked about as comfortable as beings could look when discussing a species that treated industrial toxins as condiments. The updated classification has been approved, announced Counselor Thrimp, whose species had evolved specifically to detect and avoid dangerous situations. Humans are now officially categorized as Class C survivalists, with a subcategory of inadvertently hazardous due to dietary preferences. What does that mean practically? Asked Representative Blorg from the Diplomatic Corps. Professor Klex adjusted his notes, which now included 17 different emergency protocols. It means that any human cultural exchange involving food must be treated as a potential chemical weapons demonstration. All human food offerings require hazmat clearance. And under no circumstances should anyone accept when a human offers to spice things up. What about the barbecue situation? Counselor Thrimp inquired nervously. Ambassador Martinez has been diplomatically discouraged from hosting large-scale food events until we can develop appropriate safety measures, Klex replied. Though he did seem confused about why everyone declined his invitation to try authentic Texas chili. Klex, now serving as the galaxy's first human dietary hazard specialist, raised his appendage. If I may, Counselor, we've made some additional discoveries that the Council should be aware of. More discoveries? Representative Blorg looked like he was about to request a transfer to a different galaxy. We've learned that humans have something called regional cuisines. Apparently, different areas of their planet develop different approaches to consuming toxic compounds. Different approaches? Thai cuisine focuses on capsaicin intensity combined with chemical compounds from plants like galangal and lemongrass. Indian cuisine combines capsaicin with complex spice blends that include dozens of potentially harmful compounds. Ethiopian cuisine involves fermented grain alcohols served alongside dishes that register as chemical weapons on our sensors. The Council sat in stunned silence. And then there's something called fusion cuisine, Blix continued relentlessly, where humans combine these regional poison consumption techniques into new and more creative ways to ingest deadly compounds. Counselor Thrimp's head fell into his hands. How many humans are there? Approximately 8 billion, Klex replied helpfully. 8 billion beings who treat poison as seasoning, Representative Blorg whispered. We're not dealing with a species. We're dealing with a planetary-scale biological weapon that learned diplomacy. Actually, Zara chimed in from the student observer section. There's something oddly reassuring about that. Reassuring? The entire council turned to stare at her. Think about it. Humans didn't develop these dietary habits to intimidate other species. They developed them because their planet was actively trying to kill them, and they turned survival into entertainment. They're not malicious, they're just incredibly, accidentally dangerous. And they want to share, Gomp added. Every offer to try their food, every invitation to their cultural events, they genuinely think they're being friendly. Counselor Thrimp looked thoughtful. So they're not deliberately threatening. They're just enthusiastically lethal, Professor Klex supplied, with good intentions. Which brings us to the updated diplomatic protocols, announced the Council Secretary, a being whose job it was to make sense of galaxy-threatening bureaucracy. All human diplomatic missions will now include a cultural safety officer, whose job is to translate human friendliness into non-lethal alternatives. For example, Representative Blorg asked. When humans offer to grab drinks, the cultural safety officer will suggest sharing atmospheric gases instead. When humans suggest trying the local cuisine, the officer will redirect to observing food preparation from a safe distance. Ambassador Jake Martinez chose that moment to walk into the council chambers, completely unaware that he was the subject of galaxy-wide emergency protocols. Hey everyone, Jake called out cheerfully. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I brought some homemade cookies to share, double chocolate chip with a hint of cinnamon and cayenne pepper for that extra kick. The collective gasp from the assembled delegates was audible from 3 star systems away. Ambassador Martinez, Counselor Thrimp said carefully, perhaps you could not share those right now? Oh, are you guys not hungry? No worries, I'll just leave them here for later. They're best when they're fresh anyway. Jake placed a container of what was essentially chocolate-based chemical weapons on the council table and headed for his seat, completely oblivious to the fact that every delegate was now leaning as far away from the cookies as physics would allow. You know. Name. Jake continued conversationally. Lisa suggested I tone down the spices for the diplomatic crowd, but I figured you'd all appreciate authentic human baking. These are the same recipe my grandmother used. She always said the secret was using real vanilla extract and just enough pepper to make your tongue tingle. Tongue tingling, Representative Blorg repeated faintly. Anyway, I wanted to thank everyone for making us feel so welcome. The cultural exchange has been fantastic, and we're really looking forward to hosting the return visit on Earth. I've already started planning the welcome feast. We're talking full barbecue with all the traditional sides. Pulled pork, corn on the cob, coleslaw, and I'm working on a special batch of my famous ghost pepper cornbread. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for contemplating the end of the universe. Finally, Professor Klex spoke up. Ambassador Martinez, that's very generous of you. It's the least we can do. Oh, and I almost forgot. I brought some hot sauce samples for anyone who wants to try them. They're from different regions of Earth, so you can really experience the diversity of human cuisine. As Jake began unpacking what appeared to be an entire arsenal of bottled chemical weapons, the Galactic Council came to a collective realization. They weren't just dealing with a species that had accidentally weaponized their digestive system. They were dealing with a species that was genuinely excited to share that weaponization with everyone they met. And somehow that made it both more terrifying and oddly endearing at the same time. The meeting was quietly adjourned when Jake offered to demonstrate the proper way to sample hot sauce, and the Council's emergency evacuation protocols were activated for the first time in galactic history due to an offer of friendship. In his final report, Professor Klex noted, humans remain the most unintentionally dangerous species we have encountered. Recommend continued diplomatic relations, but suggest all future meetings be conducted via long-range communication until we can develop immunity to their concept of hospitality. The report was classified under species too friendly for conventional safety protocols and became required reading for all diplomatic personnel. Jake Martinez never did understand why everyone seemed so nervous around his cooking.